Okay, greetings to everyone in whatever time zone you might find yourself. Thanks very much for joining us on this webinar. I do see a lot of people still joining the line, so that's great. But just in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and kick things off. This is Sarah Lugers from the Gold Standard speaking now. I'm the Director of Communications here. Really pleased that everyone has joined us and that there's been such interest in the session. Just to set some context, I think we all know very well that with the adoption of the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, there's just increasing energy around making more ambitious climate strategies, and organizations are increasingly aligning their objectives with these global goals. So I think the vision as a society is very clear. We can see the goalposts, but we also realize that this ambition is tremendous. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we get there most efficiently and effectively? How do we make the most of our investments towards climate and development, and also how do we measure progress? So we're pleased to discuss today an exciting new initiative that is our response to this need. So new, in fact, that you'll have an opportunity to take part in weighing in on how the standard that we'll talk about today, Gold Standard for the Global Goals, and its impacts and methodologies take shape over time so that it's tailored to the needs of project implementers, funders, everyone kind of in the value chain. So we'll move forward and I'll give a brief overview of what we'll cover today. We'll have an hour and we'll spend probably the first 30 to 40 minutes in presentation. Our CEO, Marion Verl, will start with a high-level overview of Gold Standard for the Global Goals. And then we'll take a deep dive into how the standard can be applied, looking at a transformative sector, the clean cooking and heating sector. Yepen Gorgos from the Climate and Clean Air Coalition and Sumi Mehta from the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves will outline both the challenge and a solution. And then I'll jump back on and I'll talk about each of the SDG impacts that we have kind of in process that are relevant in this context. And then we'll zoom back again to more broadly describe how Gold Standard for the Global Goals can help funders, whether they be corporates or impact investors, governments, development agencies, can use this to meet their own goals to contribute to the SDGs. And then finally, we'll open up the floor to you. And following the webinar, we're going to invite all of the participants to participate in a survey that will help us identify which impacts would be most relevant to your organization and those organizations you represent, and what claims you'd like to make, and we'll talk about this in a bit more detail when we start on the content itself. But first, let's start with a polling question, which is a little bit interactive. So you all know who else is kind of in this virtual space with us. So you'll see we're going to, if the technology serves us, you should be seeing a quick poll that queries which of the following best represents you or the organization that you're. Oh, and we see people already participating, which is terrific. We'll give it just a second and then report back to the group so you all have a snapshot as well. Let's see. Okay, we realize that people are probably still engaging, but just to give a quick glimpse, we have about 31% in the corporate sphere, quite a lot in the NGO and project implementer space, and then a few governments in the public sector. We're happy to have you as well, and then the mysterious other. So thanks for sharing where you come from, and now I'd like to turn it over to Marion Verl, who will get things going.
Thank you, Sarah, and hi everyone. It's really exciting to see such a great turnout for this webinar. I think we had over 400 registered participants. So it's great. Thank you everyone for being with us for this hour. So I'll give you a very brief introduction to what we do and what we are trying to achieve with Gold Standard for the Global Goals. So on this slide, you can see a brief snapshot of our history with key figures and a few key dates as well. What's really important to highlight here, I believe, is the fact that beyond those key facts, the common thread that's been throughout our histories is the fact that we see ourselves as a pioneering organization. Our purpose is to drive positive change. We're here to raise the bar and promote ambitious practices. So we've done that historically in the carbon markets, and now we're looking more broadly in the climate and sustainable development space. But that's been the common thread throughout our history. The way we define success is when our innovations are being taken on by others and ultimately become mainstream. So that's what we are aspiring at delivering as an organization. So today with this webinar, really we have two broad objectives. We will take this opportunity to update you on our new standard, so Gold Standard for the Global Goals, what it does and the timeline to launch. We will also talk a little bit more about funding SDG Impacts and the market study we are undertaking to identify new sources of funding for high impact interventions. So briefly about Gold Standard for the Global Goals, as you can see on this slide, it's a holistic, integrated standard to quantify and certify impacts to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's really a framework for virtually any type of climate and development projects, from renewable energy to agriculture to WASH projects. And that new standard integrates our existing standards. So we were and are still to date operating an energy standard, an NU standard, a water and a city standard. So Gold Standard for the Global Goals will integrate those existing standards and supplement those with a number of innovations and enhancements. So we are keeping our focus on climate action. Delivering on best practices corporate climate action remains a critical objective to Gold Standard for the Global Goals. But on top of that, we believe that enabling the quantification and the certification of sustainable development impacts of climate actions will contribute to raising the level of ambition. And that's really the overarching purpose of Gold Standard for the Global Goals, is to be a platform between climate action and sustainable development action, and make sure that one is used to enhance the other, and that we can create bridges to raise the level of ambition across those two broad international agendas. So today's discussion is really geared for a funding audience. We will take a deep dive on click cooking and heating technologies. And we look at a case study of how multiple impacts can be quantified and potentially monetized. But we'll also be seeking your views on how we can make the standard a better fit to your needs. So quickly, why do we need a standard? And as you can see on this slide, really, why do we need a standard in the first place, and why Gold Standard for the Global Goals? I think it really all comes down to minimizing risks on one hand and maximizing impacts. So we're talking about project-related risks, but also financial risks or reputational risks. We hear more and more about the risk of SDG washing. So that's one risk that keeps coming up. It will be fully mitigated by Gold Standard for the Global Goals as we ensure that not only positive contributions are being assessed, and that's very important, but also trade-offs and negative impacts are. So when we talk about inclusive design, when we talk about stronger safeguards, this is what we mean, making sure that projects and funders not only focus on the positive aspects, but also pay enough attention to potential risks or negative impacts. So that's going to be key to ensuring highest integrity and minimizing those risks. Another key feature of gold standard for the global goals, and that was true already in our existing standards, is the fact that we review every single project and we take the certification decision ourselves. So that's what we mean by increased assurance. It's supported by an independent technical governance body, but also by the fact that we don't solely rely on external auditors' decisions to certify projects, but also take the time and go through the process of reviewing every single project ourselves. So more details on these new features will be available as of next week when we launch the second round of consultations for gold standard for the global goals. We could see in the first poll that quite a number of participants today are coming from project developer organizations. I know you probably have quite a number of burning questions on how the standard is going to work and how it will apply to your own projects. We won't be covering those questions now. We will have additional webinars throughout the second round of consultation that will open up next week, and we will be able to cover those technical questions then. Really today's discussion is really focused on the funding side of the equation. How do we raise appetite from the funders community to invest in those projects through the lens of an SDG impact funding, and so that's that will be the purpose of our discussion. So really this webinar is the beginning of a market study that we are launching to answer those questions. We will focus on the clean cooking sector, as I mentioned before, and associated SDG impacts, because the study is sponsored by the Climate and Clean Air Coalition and the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. So we will look at identifying willingness to pay for SDG impacts associated with the clean cooking sector. However, we expect that the study will shed light on funding opportunities beyond the cooking sector. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our colleagues from the Climate and Clean Air Coalition and from the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, who will give us brief introductions on their work and their involvement in this assessment. So Yegbun Gurgos from the Finance Initiative Coordinator at the CCAC Secretariat, and then Sumi Mehta, Senior Director, Research and Evaluation at the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves.
Thanks a lot, Marion. So this is Yegbun speaking. I'm with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition in Paris at the Secretariat, which is hosted by UN Environment. So the coalition basically started 5 years ago. It's a voluntary partnership of around now 50 countries. We do have also NGOs and IGOs that are partners in the coalition to work towards reducing short-lived climate pollutants, so namely black carbon and methane, tropospheric ozone and hydrofluorocarbons. One of the initiatives that we focus on is on household energy, and we've seen that many project developers are listening to this conversation, so this is going to sound very familiar to you, but around 3 billion people cook and heat their homes, as you know, using open fires and open stoves, burning biomass. And those open stoves are high emitters of short-lived climate pollutants with important impacts on our climate and the quality of the air. They also have in common that they have a very short lifetime in the atmosphere. Contrary to CO2, they stay in the atmosphere from a few days to a few decades, which means that if we act on those pollutants today, our action will also reduce the concentrations very quickly. So the benefits will sort of accrue where action is taken. And so although the greatest benefits are near term, the reducing SLCPs, short-lived climate pollutants, could also have much longer-term benefits as well, depending also on the carbon cycle responses and the reduced sea level rise. So that's the reason why countries came together, and our mission is to make sure that the reduction of those pollutants happens. As I said, it's a voluntary partnership between states, international organizations, and NGOs. Today we have 109 partners, which includes more than 50 governments, NGOs. The Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves is a partner in the CCAC, as well as the World Bank and others. And the market assessment survey that the Gold Standard is conducting, it's part of the Household Energy Initiative of the CCAC. We really want to find a space actually to reduce these pollutants that are out of the UNFCCC negotiations. Like basically, methane for sure is included, but if you look at black carbon, we think that there should also be an opportunity for discussions and also for metrics to be able to account for not only for the climate benefits, but also for the health and gender and air quality benefits of reducing black carbon and other short-lived climate pollutants. So that's a little bit the background of the work that we're doing, and we work through 11 different initiatives. I think you're already on the next slide, so I will stop there and leave the floor to Sumi. Thank you very much.
Hi. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. So I think just picking up from where Yekben left off, I mean, we've been very interested in this issue here at the Alliance, and really the potential for this new way of thinking about benefits that Gold Standard Foundation is really leading, because we know that clean cooking is integral to achieving many of the global goals. So beyond impacts on climate, whether it's the more traditional carbon or the short-lived climate pollutants, including black carbon, also really looking at benefits to health, to gender and livelihoods as well. And so you'll see here that, in fact, if you look at the global goals, there are 10 global goals that are directly linked with clean cooking. Now, as we think about being able to achieve these benefits, I think it's really important, however, to keep in mind that clean for health, for example, is very different from green for the environment. And it's great that we actually now have a lot of progress with the development of international standards, both from ISO as well as from the World Health Organization, that really give us a better way of having some verified definitions of what is actually green for the environment versus what is actually clean for health, for example. So you can just see here some of the different cooking technologies and how they actually fall if you were to plot out the health versus the climate impacts. And so as we're thinking really about this market assessment and really looking forward to hearing the feedback that all of you provide to the Gold Standard Foundation, I think that really the key question here is, you know, we're really interested in investing in these verified impacts, and really the goal here is to accelerate the benefits to health, environment, climate, as well as other social impacts that you can actually achieve through the adoption and sustained use of clean cooking technologies. But as we do that, we're really interested in getting a better sense of who the potential buyers are, and in addition to just the potential buyers, what exactly is it that people are most interested in buying? And of course, this could vary from buyer to buyer, and more related, moreover, kind of thinking about if you're thinking about being able to get a range of benefits, how should these benefits really be packaged in a way that would be most meaningful and rewarding for you? So these, in brief, are the kinds of questions that we're really excited about, and very happy that there is now this movement towards a results-based financing approach, also referred to in some areas as performance-based payment, so that we can really think about what the specific outcomes are that could be clearly defined and measured in order to have more kind of confidence that you're achieving the benefits that you'd like to see.
Thanks a lot, Sumi, for those remarks, and Yekban as well. This is Sarah again, and I'm going to now talk about these impacts in a bit more detail and give an overview of the quick snapshot of the methodology and the claims associated with them, and keeping in mind that this approach will be valid and applicable to all sorts of types of climate and development interventions. So the first is one that we have known for many years. It's the most mature of the methodology developments. And, so we don't have to belabor this very much. We see a snapshot of some of the organizations that were part of the methodology development. And the methodology itself is quite simple. We're quantifying the reduction of GHG emissions in a project scenario versus a baseline. Where it becomes a little bit more interesting today is if looking at the claims almost from the bottom up here. We've been talking about climate neutral objectives for quite some time, carbon neutral, climate neutral. But in the context of the Paris Agreement, we understand that the need for climate finance is underscored quite heavily throughout the agreement. So an organization that's interested in contributing to the low carbon solution could be financing these VERs, as we call them, and really be making a real commitment to the Paris Agreement and climate finance in that way. Building again, still on SDG 13, as we've heard kind of outlined already, we are with the methodology launched in 2014. We're really taking this measurement of climate impact to the next level, driven in large part by our partners here on the call. It's an effort to measure black carbon and the other SLCPs that you see specified here in the methodology. And the advantage compared to what is happening today is a movement from, let's say, correlation to causation. So we are really capturing the full climate benefit, not just of the GHG emission reductions, but also these shorter impact, these faster impacts in reducing SLCPs. And a question that we're looking to explore as part of this assessment is to see one, as Sumi mentioned, how to package this income. Should it happen as a statement alongside a VER, or is there interest in funding these impacts kind of packaged uniquely? So that's something that we'll be exploring in the next few months. And to take this a bit further, it's also interesting to hear back from our stakeholders if there's interest in other methodologies to reduce SLCPs, potentially in transportation or agriculture, etc. Moving on to a critical SDG, number 3 in health, the real sea change that we see here in the clean cooking context with the methodology that we have just recently finalized and will publish soon. Again, moving from correlation to causation, we've known that there have been health improvements associated with cooking interventions for some time, but we really want to understand the specific measurement, and we can also extrapolate an economic value alongside of that by using a metric called an A daily, or an avoided disability adjusted life year. Because it's very clear that the negative health impacts, including, they range from cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, lung cancer, are a result of exposure to particulate matter. And this causes a real disease burden in different regions, which come with real health costs and losses in productivity. So using A dailies as a measurement from the reduction of exposure to particulate matter can really demonstrate the obvious humanitarian and important social benefits from improved health outcomes, but also the economic support it can provide to a region. So just as for instance, in Laos, where there's a pilot project at the moment, the disease burden associated with respiratory disease, et cetera, from exposure to indoor air pollution represents 3.5% of GDP. And so for a public funder, we think that this could be very interesting. And then again, looking at health as a metric, we could extend this in the future also to potentially urban air pollution or to outcomes related to the wash sector, just as an example. Moving on, gender equality, SDG 5, is a little less mature in terms of our methodology pipeline. It is probably one of the most cross-cutting, multidimensional, and arguably complex SDG. Therefore, we began with a scoping exercise to identify which are the most relevant metrics to report on gender equality and how can we deliver the most impact. The findings initially have recommended a two-pronged approach. So the first is at the safeguard or the requirements level of Gold Standard for the Global Goals to further strengthen gender awareness and to ensure that all global goals projects will take special care to maximize whatever potential benefits they have for the women in their affected stakeholder group. And then if we take that a step deeper to the impact quantification level, the specific metrics that are shaping up are focusing on three key outcomes at the moment. The first you see here as women's economic empowerment, reduction of time poverty, around which there's also been quite a lot of work done already, and women's voice and agency, which can speak to control over income or resources or access to credit and technology, as shown here. So working groups will be convened to understand how to take these forward best. It's probably worth mentioning here as well that Gold Standard for the Global Goals, as Marian mentioned, can really act as a very flexible framework, which could also recognize other methodologies that are in the market today or under development that meet our requirements and can act as a meta standard to kind of bring in other efforts external to the gold standard. And just finally, quickly on SDG 1, no poverty. It's probably the least mature in our pipeline in terms of how we're thinking about metrics, but it could potentially apply to any gold standard project, certainly cook stoves. And while we know that there is potential to develop very specific metrics around poverty reduction, we also recognize that some funders, for example, those who are already purchasing verified emissions reductions today, may also want to make sure that their investment is supporting the most vulnerable populations. So this could be a way to quickly flag those projects that are supporting, for instance, a population that lives under $1.90 per day. Okay. And, as mentioned, and as Sumi had already outlined earlier, we do know that cook stoves come with a variety of benefits. We've shared already the methodologies in development, but we also know that these other additional benefits exist that could be taken forward also as impact quantification methodologies for cook stove projects, but also, in renewable energy, wash, agriculture, and even in a supply chain context, for instance. So again, the survey that will be used as a follow-up to this webinar will give you an opportunity to weigh in on these. Is access to renewable energy the most important? Is that something that you'd like to see impact quantification around new job creation or the impacts around life on land via reduced pressure on local forest from the less fuel used for cooking technologies? So what we're seeing here is representing a real paradigm shift from the old world where we talked about offsetting and we had a project narrative that went alongside it, but the primary focus was on the carbon, CO2 specifically, and everything else was a co-benefit. Well, and if you've seen from this example, it's really clear. that the additional environmental and social outcomes, like if you think about reducing SLCPs, empowering women, saving lives, these are hardly co-benefits. So with Gold Standard for the Global Goals, the idea is that projects and their funders can take advantage of new features listed here. In addition, it gives you an opportunity to fund exactly the impact that's your priority. So if your core business, for example, includes operating, let's say, a fleet of diesel vehicles, perhaps you're most interested in the SLCP context. Or if you're a healthcare pharmaceutical company or a government with a high disease burden, you might be most interested in funding health outcomes. Or perhaps you simply want to be able to more credibly report on all the SDG impacts from a project you support. This framework will give you the flexibility and opportunity to do so. So in that latter case, if it's just for a reporting tool, so you can have very credible and accurate metrics, for those of you on the line or the companies that you represent who have CSR commitments, supporting a gold standard for the global goals projects can, it allows you to tick quite a lot of boxes, from environmental, social, and economic, and many impacts within each of those. So it really hits that triple bottom line concept. And the standard clearly is sitting right at the intersection of climate and development. So any funder, whether corporate, private, or public, it affords them the opportunity to really very clearly define their role in both the Paris Agreement and the Global Development Agenda. Because as Marian outlined before, we're very conscious that the success of one is dependent on that of the other. So they're interconnected and must be addressed together. And then taking this a step further, probably most interesting for corporates on the line, today we already are able to estimate the economic value associated with these multiple impacts. In the future, with Gold Standard for the Global Goals, you'll be able to quantify even more precisely. So what you see here in this graphic represents average dollar amounts of the value created from the aggregate impact based on an average gold standard cook stove project. So for instance, if you purchased 500 VERs at $10 VER, your investment would be $5,000, but in new jobs created, in reduced fuel consumption, reduced cost to a home, reduced disease, and the social cost of carbon or value of carbon, you could be creating $75,500, which I think anybody can agree is quite an ROI if you're looking at an impact perspective. And then being able to use this at the project-specific level, in addition to being able to have a common metric across all impacts, can really help build the business case for supporting these projects, and also reporting to your stakeholders if you have objectives around shared value or net positive impact, etc. I think can be a pretty useful tool. And just to summarize quickly a bit on the public context, we really do believe that sustainable development generally can be a lever for more ambitious climate action. And what this can mean, let's say for a host country first, is to ensure that those that are taking climate action are also delivering benefits to their local stakeholders, which can then build the case for more ambitious climate action. In addition, the de-risking and the ability to report on outcomes can make these projects more attractive for international finance. And then, as Marian outlined as well, it's about good governance. It's about the multiplicity of impacts and precise metrics. And before we wrap up, just a quick word on an initiative that is correlated, which is a partnership with the Science Based Targets Initiative to start to define best practice corporate climate action. So if you're thinking about how to integrate these SDG impacts within your climate strategy, by supporting gold standard projects that use the methodologies we've outlined, you can also understand and report on the impact to the SDGs. So if you're looking at the kind of like steps of best practice, it's quite clear that measuring and disclosing climate impact is almost licensed to operate today. There's a lot of growing emphasis and adoption of science-based targets, so reducing in line with what scientists tell us we need to manage to our carbon budget. And then the third, again, this need for climate finance to help the global transition to a low-carbon economy. And using gold standard for the global goals to do so allows you to also talk about your contributions to the SDGs and the development agenda. And finally, just a word on timing. Gold standard for the global goals, the market assessment that we've talked about today is in process and will continue through April. So we hope that everyone on the line has the opportunity to contribute through the survey that will follow. And we're always available for follow-up one-to-one calls as well. The assessment report documenting the findings will be issued in June. And in terms of the standard itself, as Marian already mentioned, the second and final consultation will happen in a few weeks' time, or within the next 2 weeks. And then the launch of the standard happens mid-year in June, with a go-live date of August. And in the interim, we'll be offering some technical support to ensure that projects can hit the ground running if they so choose to migrate at that time. So before we turn it over to back to you or over to you, we'll have another interactive exercise. We'd like to take an opportunity to get a temperature on, which of these impacts are interesting to your organization, or if perhaps you're a consultant, the organizations that you talk with every day. So we'll split this into two parts so you can click all that apply. Talking here about the first end of the SDG spectrum. I'll give everyone just a moment. All right, we're at about 50%. Okay, let's close the poll and share with the group. Pretty good distribution. Looks like, there's interest and support for SDGs across the board. It's interesting to see that water is coming out ahead here. And then the second batch, and we realize that we're not including partnerships and peaceful societies, so apologies that we haven't gone through all 17, but we're focusing here on those that are related to gold standard projects and cook stoves in particular. So if you could now start to weigh in on SDGs 7, 8, 13, and 14. Okay. Quick snapshot. That's looking like, yep, a lot of climate interest, which is not surprising. A lot of energy access, also interesting. Good fair amount of interest in SLCPs. That's really encouraging. It's nice to see this climbing up the agenda and getting more interest and exposure. Excellent. Okay. So now I think we shall turn it over to you. So if you can just go to the next slide. We're happy to take all questions. You can do so either by raising your hand, but I think you could also submit, if I'm not mistaken, you could use the chat function to submit your questions. And it looks like we already have a few. One question, as if you're thinking about what questions you might want to share, we have a very easy one to answer in the first instance, which is the presentation going to be publicly available? The presentation will absolutely be, the webinar recording will be sent to all participants and will be posted to our website as well, so yes. We have a few around that. Slides be shared. Does that? Okay, let's, Neil, we see a question from, let's see. Sorry, we're having a little technology issue too. Okay. If you separate these benefits, what then does a GSVER, so a carbon credit, become as it is currently defined by co-benefits? The next version of the standard will include implications for products and claims. As a guiding principle, the approach to claims is that there has to be clear transparency and disclosure around who is funding what. So if a VER is bundled and includes all of the additional co-benefits, then that needs to be disclosed as such. If there are separate funders, the VER then becomes only, it only may be communicated as the climate benefit alongside a project narrative, but it has to be very clear that the funder of the VER has funded only the climate benefit. That'll be more clearly specified in the claims guidance, but that's the working principle. Let's see. There is, sorry, we're going through the questions now. There's a question on to what extent can we use or quote the value created versus the investment in terms of contributing to society and the environment. Again, there will be some information in the claims guidance, but the principle is always transparency. So if the value creation is cited, it shall be done in a way that demonstrates that the estimates were built off of project averages and point directly to the source of the report that is on Gold Standard's website. So the guiding principle is always transparency and disclosure, so that the data is shown to be representative until such point where we have the more accurate calculations that can be project specific. Okay. Taking another question, there's a disclaimer, perhaps I missed it, but can GS projects upgrade to Gold Standard for the Global Goals, or will it be for new projects only? The answer, again, this will be part of the consultation, but the vision is for all projects to migrate to Gold Standard for the Global Goals if it makes sense in terms of their project cycle, but it will not just be limited to new projects. Let's see, sorry. Going through, we have quite a lot of questions, so thanks for your participation. There's a question from Zelda Bentham asking, could these new methodologies be applied to Gold Standard project retrospectively? I'll allow Vikash to overrule me if I'm incorrect. The answer is that it's possible, but not in all instances. Vikash, would you care to add any further detail there? Could the new methodologies be applied to Gold Standard projects retrospectively?
Yeah. Yes, you're right here. So it's possible, but within certain within certain limitations. That will be based on like project lifetime and the monitoring period.
Okay, thanks a lot, Vikash. So perhaps we can go to maybe a few people who have raised their hand. So let's see, take a few questions via audio rather than just through chat so we can hear the participants. Susanna Chua, pardon me if I haven't pronounced your name correctly, but let's hear what you have to say. Can you unmute yourself, Susanna? If you're still with us and still have a burning question. We'll give you one more moment. Olivia Henke, perhaps we can move to you if you're interested in sharing your question with the group.
No, I'm not having any questions at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. We just had a few hands raised, so we'll give, we see one last one for Anna Lehman. Anna, if you have a question, please share. If not, we'll go back to some of the questions that have been submitted via text. Anna, go ahead. I'm not sure if you have technical issues, but we can't hear you well. Actually, we can't hear you really at all, Anna. So perhaps you can submit your question via the chat function. I think we see a new hand go up here. Shraddha, if you would like to share your question. We've just unmuted you, so Shraddha, go ahead.
I had actually sent it through the chat function.
Okay, had we already answered it?
Not really, but if you'd like me to just say it, I could.
Please go ahead.
What my question was, if there are activities undertaken by the funders, maybe one of their main functions or a side investment like fossil fuels, does the gold standard account for some sort of negative accounting or like in terms of its impact that we calculated using the earlier slide?
That's a good question. I'm going to again give this one to Vikash.
Thank you.
Vikash, are you?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I couldn't hear the question. Can you get it repeated?
If the funders projects also include activities that are probably SDG negative, for instance, if it's a funder who also looks into fossil fuel projects, does the current gold standard have any scope to minus it from the credit?
So the assessment boundary will be the project which is going to be registered with gold standard, and not the other businesses of the funder, unless those are linked with each other.
If I may clarify, Susanna, were you asking though if the project itself had a negative impact? How do we account for that?
Yes, that as well as the core function. Like, do we do a background assessment that do we have a checklist which sort of qualifies or disqualifies someone from financing?
Yeah, there will be a positive and negative list to clarify which projects are eligible, which are not.
Yes, maybe just jumping in here, and this is Marion speaking. That's a very interesting question indeed. I think we need to separate two levels: the project level and the corporate level of the funder, or the organizational level of whoever is funding the project. So at the project level, we have a number of checks and criteria to make sure that the project doesn't have any negative impacts, or if there are any, that those are properly and very closely managed and mitigated. So that is being addressed at the project level. We do not run background checks on who is funding the project. What we can do is provide very clear guidelines for the project and for the funders on how they should communicate about funding and supporting the projects, but really it's up to the project to decide who they want to be funded by. We don't interfere with funding arrangements between the project and the funder.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else that would like to share? We're reviewing some of the questions submitted via text. Some of them are quite technical, so we will field those that are quite technical individually and respond to the person who's made the query. Anyone else who would like to share their question with the group? There is a question that I will share, and perhaps another presenter would like to take this. How are the co-benefits being verified? Is it only through the application of the calculation, or is there on-the-ground independent verification? So I think perhaps Marianne, you'd like to speak to this, but I think there might be a clarification between the co-benefits and the actual quantified impacts.
Yeah. So I think what's will be clearly laid out when we publish all the documents of the standard is that we're looking at quantifying benefits at two levels. One level will be what we call the project story, and that will be associated with the project level certification. So here we certify that a project has been done using best practice involving stakeholders. And currently projects are using what we call Sustainable Development Matrix, that is structured around the SDGs. So that Sustainable Development Matrix will be updated to reflect the SDGs, and we will also SDG specific matrix for different activity types. So as part of the project story or the project certification level, projects will be able to communicate on the impacts that they have in general terms, and that will be part of the certification process. So that will be audited by auditors and reviewed by us, but those impacts won't necessarily always be quantified at great detail. It will be up to the project to define the level of detail, because that's part of the project story. The methodologies that were presented in this presentation, so the health ADALYs methodology, the SLCPs methodology, the gender methodology, all are much more intensive from a monitoring purpose, and they will be used by the project with the view to unlock additional finance. So once your project is certified and you have your project level impacts that are being reviewed, you will be able to opt for a menu of impact quantification methodologies that will be slightly more intensive from a monitoring perspective, but which will be robust enough to unlock additional SDG funding. And so those methodologies will be each coupled with a financial impact assessment. So as a project, you will have to make the case, explain why you need additional finance in order to deliver those additional impacts. So really these are the two levels that will be that already exist to some extent, but that will be more clearly formalized. And in both cases, the co-benefits or the sustainable development impacts, as we mention them now, will be fully verified and certified. And so we have another question, right?
Yeah, we're testing this technology, Marianne. Can you see the...
Yes. Yeah, so I have two, so I'll take the easier one. How relevant is the new standard to the development organizations? Is there already interest by this organization to fund GS projects? So, Madlena, I assume that by development organizations you mean development agencies, like funding agencies. So what wasn't mentioned actually in the PowerPoint is that the gender methodology is funded by the government of Luxembourg. We are closely working with so the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stove, the Center for Clean Air Coalition, as well as the World Bank, Luxembourg, and other development agencies that are indeed interested in looking at leveraging gold standard as a platform to channel payments via resource-based approaches or via certified SDG impacts. So yes, it's there is already interest. However, we still have quite a number of question marks as to what other potential funders could be interesting in such a platform and in such a vehicle, and that's the purpose of the market study. So we will have much more information on the funder side at the end of the market assessment, so by June this year.
Thanks, Marion. And I think we have time for at least one more question, which I've also shot over to you, if you can see that. And then we'll just a quick word that there was also a question about can all the questions be answered and shared, and we can do that and distribute it after the webinar as well.
So thank you, David, for your question, which I will read out loud for everyone. So has gold standard been in discussion with any national governments which oppose the carbon market, such as Bolivia? Will the new standard be an acceptable alternative? I think that's a great question, David. So the short answer is that we haven't been discussing directly with Bolivia. We are very open to talking to them and to any interested government. We are a small team, so we appreciate the support of our project developers, which usually are talking to those governments and brokering those discussions with those governments on our behalf. I do, however, believe that with gold standard for the global goals, we're really moving beyond the carbon market. So that standard obviously is relevant in the carbon markets, but doesn't necessarily need to lead to the issuance of tradable assets. It's not because you certify an impact that you necessarily want to trade it. And so one of the innovation, and again, we haven't gone into that level of detail during this presentation, but one of the critical innovation that will be released with that new standard is that it will be up to the project developer to decide what to do with the certification process and whether they want to opt for the issuance of a tradable asset, like a VER, or whether they want to opt for a statement, so a paper that states how many tons of CO2 or how many tons equivalent of short-lived climate pollutants were achieved by the project. And so that innovation really frees us from the limitations and the controversy that may be associated with the carbon markets for some stakeholders that oppose them. So hopefully that could provide an opportunity for countries like Bolivia to engage in international development finance in a different way.
Thanks a lot, Marion. Since we have just 1 minute, I'd like to be conscious of everyone's time. So I'd first like to just quickly recap and comment on the resounding interest in the SDG impacts, based on the quick survey from the poll. It's really encouraging to see that there's energy and enthusiasm and a willingness to engage in realizing these types of impacts, from gender to health, short-lived climate pollutants, reduced deforestation, etc. So really encouraging. We can actually share that as well, as so the participants can see what the temperature was from the group. Again, the webinar recording will follow, along with a link to the survey and the answers that we can provide that we weren't able to get to in this webinar. So thanks again. Thank you, Marion. Thank you, Yekben, and thank you, Sumi. Thanks for everyone's time. Please feel free to reach out to the email addresses that you see here. Shoot us a question. We're happy to engage with anyone who has any comments or questions or suggestions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.